Resume the Stream 6 hearing. We're on day 3. Mr. Tiley, number 1 to go. We have your speaking notes. 3 of us on the right-hand side at least have read them. And I have thumbed my way through the office visuals. So, but we're in hands. Is
that on?
If it's showing green, you're on.
Green. Oh. I'd just like to acknowledge the help of the project coordinator, because due to a computer fault, I had a rather mishmash of references through, and she's managed to sort it, I understand. Good. Well, I have previously addressed the panel on the visual amenity value of Marshall Ridge. I now wish to call the panel's attention to a Boffin-Miskell report, which came to my notice only after presenting my previous submission. This report powerfully emphasises throughout the value of Marshall Ridge and its side slopes to several adjacent communities. Now, the authors of the report went to some trouble to demonstrate how widely the ridge affects adjacent communities. And figure 19, page 50, shows the various viewpoints they used right across a very wide area. Now, the summary on page 63, paragraph 10.7, I'd like to read this in full, because in my view, this gets to the nub of the matter. It describes the value of these ridges far better than I could. The major ridge lines forming the site, Best Ridge and Marshall Ridge, provide a sense of enclosure to the lower lying areas of the site and are highly visible from the suburban areas of Churton Park, Tower and State Highway 1. Accordingly, areas of higher landscape and visual values are the upper mid-slopes and ridgetop areas, which are not only visible, but also distinctive landscape features in themselves. These areas currently form a very strong definition between the neighbourhoods of Churton Park and Tower, and an important backdrop to these communities. The final sentence of the report reads, "There are opportunities for landscape and recreation in the creation of a very strong public space network, which would provide the separation between and definition of neighbourhoods within Upper Stebbings." Now, the term ridgeline is undefined. Allowing housing to cover side slopes to an extent that leaves only the skyline visible would negate any visual amenity value of the ridge. To assess how best to preserve the landscape value of the ridge, I suggest the only reasonable approach is that taken in the Boffin-Miskell report, which values the full ridge and side slopes together. It's illustrated in the wonderfully named section 9 viewing audience. Views from 10 viewpoints in Johnsonville, Tower and Churton Park in double page spreads show with considerable impact the visibility of the ridge, the skyline and the side slopes being referred to together throughout the report. I would just like to respectfully suggest to the panel that as far as section 9 goes, I would hope you would have the opportunity to look at it in hard copy, because the digital, if you page by page in the digital version, you lose the impact of the panoramic effect of the ridgeline. I contend the report demonstrates the point that is seeing ridge and side slopes together as a single feature giving amenity value so extensively as to make the council's response, Stream 6 development areas, section 204, too limited to give effect to the importance of ridgeline and side slopes as a single landscape feature. I ask the panel to recommend Marshall Ridge and its attendant slopes be preserved undeveloped, enhancing visual amenity and sense of place for the widespread communities that currently enjoy the ridge as a backdrop.
Thank you, Mr. Tiley. I just wanted to get my reference point. I just wanted to get my sort of geographical reference points clear. We're going to try and go up and have a good look at the development area. Go on the site. We've just got a small technical hitch that the developers plan is down with COVID, so we can't do that this week. But we're going to set that up for a little later. But I was looking at the BOFR's visual report that you've emphasised, at these viewpoints. That's figure 19 of the BOFR's report.
Right.
Tell me, page 49. And that's basically showing where the viewpoints are taken.
You're right.
And so wait till you get that in front of you. No, page 49 is not actually, there isn't a 49 on the page.
No.
But if you find page 48 and turn the page.
I'm going by figure numbers here at the moment, is that you?
It works too.
What was it, 19?
19.
Got it.
Got it? Now, you've got, I think, is it 10 or 9? No, 10.
10 points, yeah.
10 points. And my understanding of where the ridge is and where proposed development areas is in relation to the ridge is that it's all on the southern side of the ridge line, so that the relevant viewing points are 6 through 10. Maybe 5, but I'm not sure. And that's what I'm asking you. Are they the relevant ones that we ought to be looking at, rather than the ones to the north that will be on the far side of the ridge line from where the development is?
My understanding is that the ridge line and the area around it are currently designated as a future urban zone, and therefore there would be development on both sides of the ridge.
Okay, so that's something we need to check. And the larger, more philosophical question is that we've had an awful lot of evidence about the need to provide for urban development, expanded urban development to meet Wellington's housing needs. And the suggestion is that, I don't think anybody's been quite so bluntly, but the implication is that amenity issues need to give way to housing needs. That's the proposition that has essentially been put to us. And the RMA gives particular weight to what are called outstanding natural landscapes and natural features. So there on one side, but I don't think this qualifies. I don't think like I need to read the Boffers report, but I didn't get the impression they were saying that it was in that category. And so the big issue is, like, you're pressing on us the need to provide for the amenity of these areas and the landscape values. The contrary argument we've had from, well, let's just say any number of people, is that housing needs are critical and amenity just has to give way. What's your response? Now that's a huge curveball, but that's a fit, like I'm putting to you, that's the dilemma that the panel's in.
Yeah.
That it's getting competing viewpoints on the big issues.
I suppose the answer that you're looking at is what sort of a city do obviously say we want, or what sort of city should people expect to live in? Should we expect to see just nothing but houses as far as the eye can see? And is that actually going to serve the needs of Wellington in the future? And I feel that the argument that's been put to you about these housing needs is a little, well, you say the wider philosophical issue. I don't know whether I should be allowed to indulge myself here, but
feel free.
I'm going to say briefly that this whole concept of housing additional population, in my view, simply won't happen. It's a charade. I can give you in about 90 seconds some mental arithmetic. I think the basis of all of this talks of Wellington having an additional population of 50 to 80,000 people in the next 30 years. Take the upper figure, 80,000. Let's say, just for the sake of discussion, that 10,000 will go into the greenfields to the north, up at Stebbings Valley, Lincolnshire Farms, Granada North, and so on. That leaves us 70,000 people to house. Consider a 6-storey block, which has, not too extensive, so it can be slotted in as envisaged in the suburbs, 4 apartments per floor. So 24 apartments, 3 people each, say, on average, 72 people in that block. So to make it 70, we need 1,000 blocks in 30 years. We need that says 33 blocks a year. We need to complete 1 block every 11 days for the next 30 years. Great for building apprentices, but I don't think the construction industry is up to that. If we're talking about wider issues, what I can see happening here is that if the ideas behind this, the proposed district plan go ahead, a few blocks will be dotted here and there. A number of neighbourhoods will be soiled, and some developers will make a profit, and the housing demands will not be seriously met. That's a bit of a diversion, but we were talking about wider issues.
Well, I gave you the entree, but as I wanted you to understand that these are the issues that we're wrestling with, and we're getting competing viewpoints on them. But I'll ask my colleagues if they have any questions.
I was going to say, I just questioned the validity of the whole thing.
Well,
yeah.
Let's just say the contrary view has been put quite strongly. Commissioner McMahon, any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Tiley. Yes, I noted down your arithmetic with interest. What you didn't comment on is whether you think the 50 to 80k is an accurate representation of the demand. And I know you're not, well, I presume you're not an economist, but you talked about the supply component of the equation. What about the demand component. What's your view on that?
I gather these are broad estimates from the department, based on the Department of Statistics forecast. So can't say more than that. One has to have a starting point.
Yes. Yes.
If you take that as a starting point, is the actual proposed method of dealing with that, the consequences of that, clear and valid?
Yes. I mean, you've talked about a split between greenfield and suburban and city intensification. And your answer, or your thesis questions the validity of or actually the method of actually achieving the supply issue, with consequences that I think what you said is a few neighbourhoods will be spoiled as an outcome.
Well, like I was just saying, I don't think that it's actually practicable and feasible to house that many people in the time available.
What's the alternative in your view?
Will that there are questions starting to be asked about the what's happening in New Zealand overall as far as population goes, and whether in fact the population overall is going to start to decline rather than increase.
But you accept that we've got to deal with the projected demand, and the council will have to propose methods to accommodate that demand. Indeed.
And so I'm not, in fact, questioning that I said at the beginning of that commentary, let's accept even the upper end of the envelope.
Okay.
And how do we actually deal with that validly and effectively?
I presume, based on what you've said, that providing even additional scope in the northern growth areas for greenfield development isn't something that you would support. It's not.
I didn't say I wouldn't support it. I accept that the developments that have been outlined are to go ahead, but my view is that while I focused on Marshall Ridge, I mean, I don't think I'm qualified to speak, but as a general principle, I believe ridge lines around the city are of such value to the citizens here. They should all be preserved.
So what is the decision or the relief that you're asking this panel to deliver?
I think may I refer you back just to the very last paragraph of my notes.
Yes, and I've written alongside that how, by what method. I mean, the goal was clear, to preserve the undeveloped enhanced visual amenity of the ridgeline, but how should that be undertaken?
At the moment, the plan designates it as a future urban zone. I believe I'm right in saying that with the reference that I make to development, the response of the council in development areas, section 204,
yes,
says that the ridgeline will be preserved. But my argument is that needs to be rewritten in a different manner. That the ridgeline could be taken as skyline almost, and you could have houses nudging right up to it. So I'd like to see that section 204, if that section 204 is to represent a revised wording.
With the emphasis not just on the ridge but the side slopes as well.
Yes, that the wording needs to be expanded there to as I said, to give effect to the importance of the ridgeline and side slopes as a single feature.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Mr. Birch.
Thank you, Mr. Tiley. Just one thing I note that, like you say, there has been a recommendation to put a layer of protection over Marshall Ridge. And I understand, I'm not sure whether that is the skyline or that includes some slope either. So that's something that will need to be clarified. It's that, you know, an area has been drawn on the map to for some protection, and which means that no development can encroach into that area. There's also a lot of area of no build, which matches up with the ridge line, with Marshall Ridge. Once again, I don't know how much slope that includes, so it will be good to get some answers around that from council to just ascertain, you know, the extent of that protection area. So yeah, you've highlighted that issue, so I appreciate that. There's not really a question in that for me. It's just more of a clarification request from council, as in what that area does entail, how far it goes down the slopes, and yeah. So I thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Yes, it's a question of striking a balance. So.
I mean, I've got this map. I'd love for you to just have a look at it, if you wouldn't mind. This was handed up to us. That just gives you an idea of the added. So this is the Marshall Ridge area that's been added. So like I say, and these are all no build areas, the other grey. So I just wondered if that helps give you.
Which is no build area?
This grey, the lighter grey. So the dark grey is Marshall Ridge and the lighter grey is no build. So we'll get some clarification on the extent of that and what that does include. Right. But I just wondered if you'd seen
that lighter. I haven't seen it. So does that lighter grey sort of mean that the future urban zone regulation is no longer?
So this is the whole future urban zone. But these areas are no build. These areas are residential development. Yeah. This map was just handed up to us the other day, so I felt like maybe you hadn't seen it. So, yeah.
And so this is a no build area.
Yeah. So that's the other side of the slope, I'm assuming.
Well, that's equally, you know, important for all the visuals
coming from that side.
Yeah.
So we can get Jazz to email you a copy of that map if you like, if that would be of assistance.
I appreciate seeing that. Yes, very much.
It's not quite final because there are some bits that aren't quite right, but you're interested in this bit, so that.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So we will ask. Just
to follow on with that questioning from the recommendation from the reporting planner is to remove the future urban zone and to replace the areas you've just been looking at with the zones that are appropriate for it.
Or a no build.
So the no build, I believe, is going to be corrected as largely natural open space. Natural open space, all that grey area looked at as opposed to the natural open space zone.
Well, that looks much more promising than the wording that we're dealing with. Yes.
But as Commissioner Birch said, we need to get on the ground and actually have a look, because on a plan here, I have no real concept of how far up the slope to go, and that's your real concern. Is that creep, if I dare say, up the slopes into the view shafts.
So I think that I've written down promising, but need to check it.
Right.
Like that's the takeaway message that I take from at the end of our discussion.
All right.
Is that fair?
Fair enough. Yeah. If you say you are going out to have a look at the area, I just recommend there's a relatively new footpath, Earlstoke Crescent goes along the foothills of Churton Park on the northern side, and this footpath zigzags up from Earlstoke Crescent, and you've only got to walk up it for 1 minute, 2 minutes. It lifts you up high enough, and you can look back at Marshall Ridge, and it looks like it's a magnificent, outstanding feature amongst the housing there. And that brings the point home.
I believe you tabled some photographs from that viewpoint at a previous hearing. Is that correct?
You are quite right. Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tiley.
Thank you for your time.
To us. So the next submitter is in effect the development area developers represented by Mr. Halliday. Are you out there, Mr. Halliday, and how are you feeling?
Thank you.
Volume, you've muted.
Can you hear me now?
We can. So the first question is, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling better, but I'm sure of those that have had COVID know of what's called brain fog. So it is a little bit tricky to focus sometimes. But yeah, I'm here. I'm conscious of your valuable time, so I wanted to make an effort to appear before you and speak as best I can in front regarding the submission and the evidence.
Well, can we go slow here? That we're not under time pressure. So just go slow, and if you want to take a break, then just let us know. The other thing is that I am aware, having had COVID the week before Christmas myself, that you are labouring under a disadvantage, even though you're looking fitter than I was expecting you to look. So well done. That if obviously we're online and you'll be able to look again at what you've said to us, but in view of the disadvantage you're under, what I propose is that if, having looked at the live screen, you think I should have told them this, when you're probably on the other side of the weekend, when you're hopefully out the other side, I'll give you leave to file any additional comments you want to make about the questions we've asked you by close of business next Thursday.
Great. Appreciate that. Thank you.
So basically, don't feel under pressure to when it's all a blur today, and you have the opportunity to augment what you tell us or to correct what you tell us. Once you think, oh no, that wasn't right, that's fine. We understand that. The other thing is that when we talked to the reporting officer, she said to us, well, there are some things with these development area zone provisions. If we accept her recommendation that the fuzz should go and that they should be immediate zones, there are some tweaking that's required that she needs to talk to you about. She wasn't feeling that flash yesterday either. So the resolution that the panel have come to is that we will direct the two of you conference in terms of the Environment Court Code requirements about the zone provisions when you're both feeling in better form, probably hopefully next week, but I'll release a minute. So that's it, all in the nature of advance notice of things that have been happening while you've been laid up.
Great. Thank you for the update.
And so with that as an extended introduction, how would you like to proceed? We have your evidence, which we've read. We've talked at length to Ms. Van Huren Giles about the spatial issues that you've raised, and indeed the the issues you raised about, the need for flexibility and the extent to which the provisions already do that or do not do that. But so it's over to you. How would you like to present this?
Oh, look, I'll just do summary as best I can. I will let you know that I did sit in on the council presentation yesterday as best I could. Took me a couple of goes to listen to it, just with concentration, but I did hear the issues you raised with her. I heard her answers, so I'm fairly familiar with some of the questions and issues and concerns you've got. I also heard your suggestion about a conferencing session with her. More than happy to do that next week. I am available, and I was also going to suggest if there were some questions I wasn't in a position to think through completely, if I could provide a written response, and you've answered or given me that opportunity, so I appreciate that. As you know, I am the planner who prepared the submissions on behalf of the landowners to the proposed district plan, and I circulated my evidence a couple of weeks ago in response to the Section 42A report. I only saw the supplementary evidence from Hannah. Only read it yesterday afternoon. I just completely missed it with my illness. So I have read her supplementary evidence. So I don't know how you want, if you want to take my evidence as read, or if you want me to highlight my key points, or if you want me to skip to Hannah's evidence and my supplementary evidence and make comments on that, or whether you want to, how would you like to work through it? I'm happy to be flexible. I know there's some key issues I want to address, and there were some questions you asked of Hannah, which she suggested I'd be best placed to answer. So happy to try and answer those. But
well, like I think that you should take your evidence as read, as say we're across it. Like accepting that you're going to conference, I think that we're principally in, like, the process is one of progressive refinement. Hannah has agreed with some points that you've made and disagreed with others, and you'll probably and hopefully further reduce the areas of disagreement when you conference. But I think we want to get a sense of your side of the argument on the issues that Hannah identifies as still being in contention. So maybe focus on her rebuttal and your response to that.
sure. Okay. So
And before you go, the other thing in terms of preliminary notes is that we do want to go on site. We do want to get a better sense of the topography in those areas of contention. But clearly that, given you're laid up, that's not going to happen this week. I've said to Jazz that we're going to be reforming on the 4th of April. We'll target that, as you have the responsibility for ensuring it's not pouring with rain. It's sort of it's just a small challenge. But,
yeah, that's a tough one.
Yes, well, I'm not sure what plan B is, but we definitely intend to go on site. If we can't do it on the 4th, we'll have to think further and liaise back with you. But just take that as a given.
Yeah, no, I think that'd be highly beneficial to just to eyeball the land. The two sites are different, and yeah, I think to be able to see the lie of the land will be hugely beneficial to the panel and their decision making. Just might be a good entry point into one of your questions about the use of the land currently. Are you happy for me just to move?
Absolutely, you fire into it.
So yeah, one of the questions that was asked is around what's the land currently being used for, and at the moment it's used for low intensity dry stock grazing, very low density. So the land has very little agricultural value, and and is not being sort of used as a viable economic farming activity. It's been used by a farmer who fattens stock for other people and brings stock in and out. So it's currently being used for that purpose, primarily beef, some sheep, but at very low stock levels. And the reason for that is twofold, is just because the land hasn't been well maintained because of the impending urbanisation or proposed urbanisation of it in terms of fence lines, and also just in terms of the farmer is continually being eroded of land as we develop, whereas the developer develops the land. So it's a low intensity farming use. And so that was one of the questions that was asked. And I think the other question that was asked yesterday was about what is the current level of design or development for the area in support of the removal of the fuzz and upzoning, if you like, the term that's being used, and implementation of zones. So I can tell you that in Lincolnshire, we do have an approval, you're probably aware, for a 330 lot subdivision, including bulk earthworks, which are currently underway. Stage 1, they're going to take 3 years to complete with the Regional Council restrictions on winter works. So we call them seasons in between those shutdown periods. And that, once that's completed, it'll provide a linkage through to Woodridge. So that area, that's been approved, and there's also another approval just to the north of that, which is for a 3 lot commercial, which Hannah saw on site when I accompanied her. We have another area that's had an earthworks design done for it, but unconsented. So if you group all those 3 consents together, my best estimate is that we have approvals or designs for approximately 25 to 30% of the total Lincolnshire land. So I don't know if that informs your thinking about the wisdom of removing the future urban zone and upzoning. As I said in my evidence, on balance, I think that's a sensible solution. The difficulty is for the areas that we haven't designed is implementing zone boundaries that then become fixed, which is obviously a key submission point.
Before you go on, when you said 25 to 30% of the total Lincolnshire land, is that the total site or the total area identified in the development plan for development?
No, it's what I meant by that was that, so of all the development area boundary land, the submitters or the landowners who I represent own 80% of that. So the part they don't own is the land at the south end, which is owned by Woodridge Holdings. So
can you just go slow? I'll just write this down.
So the total Lincolnshire farm development area, as shown on the map, the submitter who I represent owns 80% of that total development area. So not all, 80% approximately.
And the question I was targeting was that the structure plan has both the development area structure plan has development areas and non-development areas, open space areas. So yeah, it's basically 25 to 30% of what, given, as you say, you've got your clients have 80% of the land. A percentage of that is earmarked for open space. So is it 25 to 30% of the total development area, the outside boundary? Is it of the identified development areas? Is it the identified development areas that your clients own? That's the
Yep.
And the other thing is, I also appreciate it's an approximation, but just give me a sense of that.
So I'm referring to the 80% of the development area that the submitter owns, that I represent. I'm excluding the open space areas. So when I say 25 to 30%, I'm referring to those developable areas. So that would be, you know, the residential, medium density residential, and the general industrial. So the developable areas is what I'm referring to when I say 25 to 30%.
Gotcha. But sorry, so I just thought it was useful to clarify that, but carry on.
So that's Lincolnshire. In terms of Upper Stebbings and Glenside, so Glenside West has been fully designed, earthworks and subdivision, but isn't consented. And Upper Stebbings has been fully designed through a process facilitated by council as part of the preliminary work on Upper Stebbings. You probably read the history with the workshops that happened with the community and all the consultation that happened leading up to the Upper Stebbings plan. So Origin was a consultancy, was engaged to assist, and they were present and with myself, the landowner, and representatives from Wellington City Council and the community to come up with a design, because we quickly realised through the consultation process, given the topography, you need to actually get some design work done in terms of how you'd shape the land before you could come up with a meaningful development plan. So again, the design work is done for Upper Stebbings, but unconsented, obviously, with the current zoning. So that's just a bit of a background in terms of where we're at. I just got the impression from the hearing yesterday and the information that Hannah passed that the total design of all these areas was known, therefore made it more appropriate to upzone or implement zone boundaries. And my point is, while I support doing that, the point is that not all the Lincolnshire, for example, has been designed, and that just highlights my issue with fixing boundaries prior to that occurring.
The question I was canvassing, you would have heard with Hannah, is that, picking up on your point, that if and to the extent it's not designed, and of course the design may get tweaked when you have to consent it, so even though it's designed, I appreciate that may change. That's not set in stone either. And so the question is, how, in this will be the issue you talk to Hannah about in conferencing, no doubt, but in conceptual terms, not down to the drafting, in conceptual terms, if it's a formed zone, how do you accommodate? What mechanism does there need to be in the zone rules for the development areas to give the kind of flexibility you're talking about? What I was talking to Hannah about yesterday was, well, if the neighbouring zone is natural open space, does the development area need like in effect a natural open space precinct that says minor incursions into the natural open space following full design need to be assessed, but in principle are to be treated more favourably than the natural open space not in this development area, that kind of thing. What do you think? What's the mechanism?
I listened to that discussion you had about precincts. Well, is it a precinct? Is it not a precinct? And I couldn't quite work out where it landed. But
I think the answer is no. It's not a precinct.
Yeah.
But the national planning standards identify the potential for development areas with their own provisions, similar to how a precinct would work. Like, I'm not a planner, but that's my understanding of the description that Hannah gave us.
Yeah.
So it's not called a precinct, but it operates the way a precinct would operate with special rules.
Yeah. Which begs the question is, should we leave the area? Should we not upzone it and leave it as a, because the benefit that was had from a structure plan was that it would sit underneath the current urban development area zoning. It was always made clear it was flexible, and I never had issues writing consents where we did creep, or when I say creep, I'm saying there were some areas that turned out were suitable for development, and it makes perfect sense and efficient use of land to take them. But there were areas that were unsuitable, and we were saying, well, they should, even though they're residential, should go to open space. So it was give and take. It wasn't all take. But we had that flexibility through the planning process, and I just want to ensure that's not lost. How we do that now with an upzoning precincts, look, I don't know. I've thought about it since your discussion yesterday. I can't form a view on that. I also heard the discussion and the references back to the high level policies that would be in place, and the words, and your discussion about the words in general accordance. All I'm trying to avoid, and I accept that, all I'm trying to avoid is a scenario where a council consenting planner says, hey, look, you're over the boundary here into open space. It's a non-compliant activity. It doesn't pass the gateway test, and therefore we think a plan change is the best way forward. And I just don't want to be in that situation, purely for cost, time and uncertainty, appeal rights. And I think it was played down a little bit that how the necessity of a plan change. But in my view, my involvement in plan changes, they're not easy, they're long, and I just don't think it's appropriate to be doing that every time, from here on in. If this was to be upzoned, if we did a proposal and I'm writing a consent, having to say that we're in a natural open space zone, but yeah.
Like, as I say, the concept that I had was a specific policy that that says in this particular natural open space zone, there is greater flexibility to intrude from the margins in, not as you say, the policy might invite consideration of, well, I draw the analogy with land swaps, that the quid pro quo for extending into the natural space area might be an equivalent area. Like, it's all in the words, and that's where I defer to the planners. I'm a concept person. But the concept would be, well, one of the things that could be taken into account, is this a minor incursion? If it's a more than minor incursion, is there a quid pro quo on offer about other land that could be converted to open space? That kind of concept. But what's your view? Like, the devil's in the detail, obviously, but so this is a conceptual discussion.
Yeah, I mean, quid pro quo could work, but like I said, sometimes following design, you end up in a scenario where you have a lot of land that was identified that actually should be open space, and vice versa, and it's just a matter of having the vehicle to enable that flexibility. I guess that's where I sit on it. I'm not too sure of the answer, and maybe that can come out. I'm asking myself whether or not an amendment to the policy would be sufficient to do it in order to pass the gateway test if it became non-complying in terms of the objectives and policies, and if there was a policy sitting there that clearly spelt that out, then there's a pathway without a council consenting planner saying no, it's a plan change scenario. Just on that, when you were having the discussion about the current policies as drafted for the Dev 2, Dev 3, I was looking at them and maybe I've missed something, but under the Lincolnshire plan, there were policies in there that did talk about in general accordance, but then I noticed there was one in the, if I can just, you just give me a minute to find it. So for Lincolnshire, yeah, there was Dev 2 P1 talked about development in general accordance, but in the Dev 3 equivalent policy, if I can find that. I was in fact looking at policy 1 of that. Dev 3 P1 of the Upper Stebbings, which talked about activities that are in accordance with development plans. So I don't know if anyone in the panel saw that, but there was a discussion about Dev 3 P3, which talked about potential compatible activities, where there was a reference to only allow activities that are not in general accordance. But as I was listening in and looking through these policies, it was the Dev 3 P1 where it was a bit more rigid. So this is for Upper Stebbings, and there was no reference to in general accordance. It just did say in accordance. So I guess it's just a matter of making sure, yeah, these policies do have that flexibility, and then deciding whether or not that is sufficient to enable people like myself to write consents for these zones once they're designed that sort of creep over, and there's a you know, overs and unders, if you like, with open space and residential land.
Well, as I say, you'll have the opportunity to put your head together with Hannah and tell us what the answer is, and if you think that the end result doesn't do that, tell us that too in the conference statement. Yeah,
I just need to think through a consenting process. That's how my brain works. Is this framework going to work when it comes time to writing a consent? And that's, I just need to think that through, and my head's a bit clearer.
Yes, I was going to say that. I suspect you might have more ideas when your head's a little clearer, and so we'll just take that as a given. The other thing that the other suggestion that Hannah came up with about how to deal with the issues you had with the proposed school site within a development area was to zone at LCZ. What's your attitude to that?
Yeah, so as I said, I only sort of became aware the supplementary evidence was around yesterday, so I did read that in the afternoon as best I could. I've formed a view currently that it's not appropriate. I guess the thrust of my evidence on this matter was around not so much ensuring that a school could be built, because there's ways and means for the Ministry of Education to do that. Obviously, there's designations, there's lots of powers. It was more about ensuring that there was an alternate use should a school not be built. And that was why I suggested, and I've done a bit more research around other schools in the area, including Amesbury School, which is close to Upper Stebbings. I've looked at Churton Park School and Paparangi School. They all have an underlying zoning of residential, and that supports my evidence that that's the most appropriate. So, as I said, the thrust of my evidence was to ensure there was an alternate use should the school not be built, whereas I think Hannah's sort of trying to provide a zone that would facilitate it to be built. And the risk is, if it doesn't get built for whatever reason, funding or demand, we don't want to be left with a local centre zone. And I picked up on your point, Commissioner, about if you're going to go with local centre zone, doesn't that suggest you need high density residential around it, which is not part of that package. So it does raise another question, like you pointed out, about the appropriateness of it. So at this stage, I'm not supportive of that. I believe it should be medium density. And as I said, because the ministry have a lot of powers and means to build a school if they want to, regardless of the zoning. So that's my feedback on that.
Okay, and I'll ask my colleagues if they have any questions of you in relation to these sort of issues, and then I think that we should go specifically to the areas, the spatial areas that are still in contention, and get your position on those. So, Commissioner Schofield, any?
Yes, thank you. I think it will be useful once your head is clearer, the fog is lifted, to work with the reporting officer and sort of iron out, because that's some of the questions that the Chair just raised around the whole general accordance, will that work kind of thing. The dev rules that permit activities in general accordance with the development plans and things like that. So that we'll be very interested in seeing what comes out of that discussion. I think the biggest question, you would have heard the preceding submitter, Mr. Tiley, and Glenside will be next, around the side slopes, as they call them, to the ridge tops. I'm just interested in your view about how the development areas have addressed that issue in terms of, do they quote unquote creep up into the ridge lines to be visible or not? I mean, we'll have our own site visit next week, hopefully, but interested in your view.
Yeah, so
Next month, not next week.
Yeah, next month, yeah.
This is in relation to Upper Stebbings and West Glenside. So my understanding of the ridgelines and hilltops was these Marshall Ridge and Best Ridge, which runs to the west of Upper Stebbings, and it's Marshall Ridge, which I think is.
Can you just clarify? Did you say best as in BEST?
Yes, yeah. So Best Ridge runs to the west of this area, and that's the sort of hill that over there is the Harry Valley. But the ridge line in contention, as raised by Mr. Tiley, is the second ridge, which comes down through the development area and runs up above Glenside West. So that's Marshall's Ridge, and during the discussions and the consultations that's occurred over the last 4 years prior to the notification of this area with the community, it was, my recollection was that it was accepted that the ridge line should be protected, but it would be narrowed to protect just the highest parts of it. And that's reflected in the map. If you look at the map, particularly above Glenside West, it's quite a narrow ridge, whereas previously under Plan Change 33 back in the day when Boffamiskell did their mapping and the original ridgeline overlays in the district plan, they were a lot wider. So they've been narrowed to only protect the very peaks. And so to that extent, I would agree that there has been some creep up the lower slopes into those areas. The previously mapped areas, they were quite wide. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, in part. And I suppose the other part of the answer in my head is that much of that so-called creep is outside the future urban zone anyway. It's already committed to and being built, I presume. So
yeah, some of it has, yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. McMahon?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Halliday. Sorry to hear about your predicament. Having been in the New Plymouth hearings and conducted COVID during those, I understand How are you feeling? Look, I really don't have any questions to you because, as Chair said, a lot of the diva will be in the detail, and I'm very encouraged that you're open to conferencing with the reporting officer. I can certainly understand the conundrum that you and your client are in terms of converting a FUZ to a live zone. And I'm guessing the timing of this is a little bit unfortunate, and that at one end of the spectrum, the chocolates are there ready to be taken, but the master planning exercise hasn't been completed to completely inform what that live zoning might be. And as a practitioner, I've been in that position myself also. What we will need from you, though, at the end of the conferencing stage is a clear position as to what your preference is vis-a-vis the development areas first to fuzz. And, you know, I'm just thinking aloud here, there might be a number of options. It could be the complete removal of the fuzz and as recommended, and replacement of development areas, but they will be locked and loaded, and you will be at the mercy of the language that's in the plan. I'm not necessarily convinced that a policy provision isn't the necessary answer. So you might want to give some thought to how rigid you want to lock that in. I've seen other provisions that, you know, and there might be an opportunity for partial removal of the fuzz and partial upzoning. So these are all Section 32 matters that you need to give some thought to. Yeah. And it's not for me to tell you how to do that. Sometimes I can't help myself. I've seen provisions where a development rule requires a structure plan to be introduced and approved. Now, whether that's through a first schedule process or not, I'm not too sure. I'm not here to give you planning advice. You're a planner yourself, but if one of the options is to only partially remove the fuzz and leave the rest to a future structure plan exercise, you might want to give some thought along with Hannah as to how that might be achieved.
But bear in mind the case law that came out of Auckland.
Yes.
About rules requiring plans, applications for plans.
Yep.
That's a problem.
Yes, and I'm also aware of the Queenstown case about the changing activity status, and that could result. So, but you know, they are options if they need to be dismissed, Mr. Halliday. So, but I guess the point is, it is a conundrum. I recognise that, and it's about how you balance the certainty and flexibility that your clients. Yeah. So maybe the policy is the answer. I don't know, but what, just out of interest, what is the activity status? I mean, if there is not compliance, what is the default? Is it non-compliant?
Currently?
Proposed. Proposed plan.
It's under the proposed. What if a land use wasn't permitted?
So, well, if there is not accordance or a general accordance with the rules or any ODP.
It defaults to non-compliant, is my understanding.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Have you challenged that?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
No. To be honest, the removal of the fuzz, I didn't really see that coming. We didn't even submit on the future urban zone.
Yes.
We focused on the chapters to do with the development areas and the medium density rules was the focus of the submissions I wrote. So
yes,
it's sort of a I mean, I saw the submission by Kangaora, but it sort of wasn't something I had actually considered in depth as part of the planning process until now.
Yeah, but I can imagine it's in many respects there's an aspect that would be appealing to your client for that to occur.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the key advantages, I'm sure you're aware of Greater Wellington's Plan Change 1, which is chasing clearly not supportive of greenfield development, and one of the references they use in there is, I might be going off point here. I'm not sure if the panel's aware of what that means for development, but it's significant in terms of greenfield, and ring fences anything other than, or ring fences only development that's planned, and is the word they use, and planned means in a district plan as future urban or zoned.
Yes.
And so it just puts us one further step away from that, because that's still in a hearings process, and that definition could change. I don't know.
Yes, we heard from Greater Wellington yesterday. They produced a statement that said that they were neutral in relation to these matters,
Right.
and that they didn't oppose the removal of the FUZ, but they, without specifying any particular relief, they wanted the development to give effect to Plan Change 1.
I think that the take-home message we got from Greater Wellington was that, in their view, this development, given where you got to in the planning process on the city side, is consistent with a Plan Change 1, which I no doubt would come as a significant relief to you.
Yeah. Yep.
It would. I do. However, I do know that the consenting process with them will be extremely challenging. Even with the support of the city and this upzoning or fuzz, whatever it ends up being. Just by way of information, the consent that I obtained for the landowner for the 330 lot subdivision that I referred to earlier took me 3 years to get approved.
Okay.
And it's incredibly difficult to obtain consent. So, and it's made even harder under Plan Change 1.
Yep. Just wrapping that up, one of the, I guess, if you could, in your conferencing statement, if you could focus on 3 options: complete removal of the fuzz.
Sure. Yep.
Complete retention of the fuzz, and partial removal retention of the fuzz.
Sure. Yep.
Apart from that, I've just got one minor question, and I should know the answer, but I don't. Is you said that the land that is of low productivity, and you talked about it's grazing for low intensity beef and sheep farming, low stocking levels. Just for the record, what's the land use capability classification of the land?
I don't know is the answer, but I'm guessing it would be 3 or 4.
Okay. Have you addressed your mind to whether the provisions of the NPS HPL apply? And they usually, I don't know if you've read that document, it's very directive.
I have, yeah.
And high productive land is land that's zoned either LUC 1, 2 or 3 and is zoned rural or rural productive. So that's conjunctive test.
Right.
Would any of the land meet that first test?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Could you address that in your reply? And it's clause 3.5 of the HP of the NPS.
3.5. Sure.
I think it's 3. I'm just going by memory.
So reply, I think, is the wrong word.
Sorry.
But
With a small r.
Yes. I think as I've given you leave to augment what you say to us by close of Thursday, could you include, even if there's nothing you want to add, can you address that question? I think like the NPS HPL is highly complex. It's got a similar carve out for land provided in growth strategies and the like.
Yes.
But I think that for the record, we need to be sure that it doesn't apply, and if it does, the extent to which it applies.
Yes.
We've previously been told that there's no highly productive land in Wellington. That was the council's initial position.
Yes.
But because this is clearly greenfield development, I think we need We need that surety from you if you could do that for us.
That's right. The chair's absolutely right. The provision I quoted, the first part of the provision defines what is productive land, and it's conjunctive. It must be LUC 1, 2 or 3 and zoned rural productive. But there are some, despite that, there are some exceptions to that, and there are 2 clauses listed in that second part of the clause 3.5 that creates the carve out, if you like.
Sure, I'll have a look at that and provide you with a comment.
Thank you. Commissioner Burge, any questions?
Sure. One more. Sorry. Just sorry, Mr. Halliday. Just going back to Lincolnshire Farm and that the school site and the whole issue of zoning at LCZ or not. The actual shopping area, the actual neighbourhood centre, as it's shown in the plan. What is the plan for that centre? What will it look like? How big would it be, etc.?
Well, there's an actual diagram provided in the development plan. I don't know if you've spotted that in the very last page in the appendix 12. There's actually a little diagram of how the council would like that to look. So the appendix 12 is a concept plan for that local centre. It's a small supermarket, some shared parking, and the access points are identified.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so there would be, the proposal is for a supermarket anchor.
A small sized sort of 4 square type size. That was the way I understood it. I think there's actually, I think there was some actually local centre. Yeah, there was in the development Dev 2 appendix R1 under the requirements. It talks about a public plaza with a minimum area of 400 square metres. A local centre must provide for a supermarket and at least 6 commercial premises with ground floor areas of less than 250 square metres each. So it would be sort of like I'm trying to think of an equivalent little centre around Wellington, but I can't off the top of my head. But a small scale sort of service type.
And your view about the zone?
I'll give you one. Marston Village.
Yes. Yep.
Because I lived at Glory for 30 years. It's the difference between Marston Village and the Glory Mall.
Right.
Like that's what you're talking about. It's at the Marston Village end of the retail spectrum.
Okay. In your opinion about its zoning, if the FUZ was uplifted?
The local community zone for that area.
For the supermarket and plaza and things.
Oh look, I don't think I have an issue with that part of the
being in an LCZ.
No, it was more the community centre and the school, which I was referring to, needing an alternate zoning because they are bits of land that are going to be ultimately purchased, whereas this centre is likely to be developed by the landowner. So I don't have an issue, I don't believe, with that remaining as or being given a LCZ zoning.
Thank you.
Okay, and the last thing I think we need from you, Mr. Halliday, is you heard Ms. Van Heeren Giles talk about her view on the spatial areas in contention. Is there anything you want to add to the discussion? And if you want to put that in writing, well, that's fine. Well, because it may be you want to rewatch what she said and give it to us, because one of the problems we have, having not yet been on the site, is we have difficulty visualising these particular areas. So if you can add any useful comment now, but but more detailed comment with some diagrams or some maps would probably be of more use to us.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just as by way of a brief comment, I'm supportive of her recommendation to allocate some large lot residential on Glenside West. And in terms of Upper Stebbings, she's agreed that there are 2 additional areas that we had identified that would be appropriate to be zoned. I guess the guts of, or the thrust of my evidence was just ensure that all available land or suitable land in this area is identified for residential use. And the reason for that is, as you can see, this development plan area has a reference to no build zones, which is different to Lincolnshire, and those no build zones are going to go to natural open space, which is basically going to shut the door again on developed residential use. And I don't want to be in a position where once we get there and we're, you can see parcels of land that are entirely suitable, but unfortunately got mapped as no build or natural open space. So I just see this as a critical point to make sure we get that right in this process. And I think Hannah had correctly identified a policy under the Urban Form and Development Chapter, Policy 2, which talked about urban development and identified greenfield making efficient use of land. And I agree with that. And that is, we need to make the right decisions now. And as part of that is getting your head around the lie of the land, and also, any other planning maps or development maps that I can provide that would show that there are little pockets that will be entirely suitable that have been missed. So that's the only comment I'll make. What would you like me to do with respect to closing out the other areas? Would you like?
Well, I think what would be useful would be a point-by-point commentary, because what Hannah did was take us round the 2 development areas, basically putting a circle around all of the issues that you'd raised, some of which she agreed, some of which she didn't. And I think what would be useful is if you gave us like an initial diagram with each area that's still in contention numbered, so we make certain we're talking about the right area, and then give us a commentary, in effect, a response to what Hannah told us verbally yesterday.
Sure. Yeah.
And with obviously the focus with points where you consider that she's mistaken, or she's overemphasized something that you don't agree with. Yeah,
I guess, I mean, a lot of her justification for not supporting the other areas were around SNA's presence of streams or presence of ridgeline. And whilst I accept that to a degree, you have to remember that getting into this land involves crossing streams anyway. But I guess her point is, well, those stream losses have been accepted as part of the consultation process, and any further loss is not accepted. But what I want to show you is that there are some areas that don't involve stream loss or SNAs. So I'll take on board your request, and I'll endeavour to provide a diagram with each of those other areas numbered that are in contention, and some further information or justification.
Thank you. I'll just check if there are any final questions. That's it for us. Wish you a speedy recovery, Mr. Halliday.
Thank you for accommodating my my situation. Appreciate that.
It's not a worry. So the old saying, we'll be in touch.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're now up to the Glenside Progressive Association, Mr. Blackett, I presume.
Right, thank you. Right, well, my name's Barry Blackett. I'm from the Glenside Progressive Association. I've been a committee member since 2004, and I manage their restoration program and predator-free. My presentation today refers to the area zone for future urban zone in Glenside West. We make the case that Glenside West is unsuitable for the proposed housing development and suggest large lot residential instead. My presentation covers 5 areas: location and connectivity, visual amenity, housing, housing density and the National Policy Statement on Urban Development, the development proposal and environmental impacts. And I won't follow my notes now, and I'll just talk to my slides if that's okay.
Absolutely.
So in the first slide on the left is the area designated. The upper area is Upper Stebbings Valley and the lower area is Glenside West. They were treated together as a structure plan, but in fact, if you go there, you find the areas are completely separated. There's no possibility of a road linking the two. There's transmission lines in the big forest there. And so the areas are actually quite separate. We've got some comments about Upper Stebbings, but I'm just going to talk about Glenside West today because that's where our main concerns are. On the right-hand side, it shows the ridge lines and hilltops overlay for Stebbings Valley that was introduced into council in 2005. There were a period of appeals, mostly by Stebbings Farmland, and Mr. Halliday was involved in those. And there was agreement on having some parts of the overlay removed, but the area which we're talking about, and I don't think I have a pointer that I can use, but the area we're talking about was not appealed by Stebbings Farmlands at the time. And so the whole overlay was accepted in 2009. And that includes about 18 or 19 ridge lines and a total area of about 50 square kilometres. You'll notice how broad the area is. It needs to be broad, as I'll show you in a moment. But just to locate you, at the bottom of the slide is the Glenside village where I live and Churton Park just beside it. And the area 134 is now Westchester Drive. This shows you the area visually.
So can you just go back? I think that I'm looking at a print microscopic. 134 is that knob that sticks up.
It's the blue designation.
Yes.
I was referring to 134 being the designation for Westchester Road, which is really nothing to do with it.
Okay.
The road's been
Which
built
is
10 years.
like it's just a reference point.
Okay.
Like that's a question. Like I'm trying to understand. Get my orientation right.
Right. Okay.
But that's 134 is Westchester. Gotcha. Thank you.
Right. This is the view of Glenside West from the motorway and from nearby suburbs. And it's been talked about a lot in council plans, including the Northern the Northern Reserve Management Plan is one here anyway in 2008, and I'll just read out part of that. Marshall Ridge is valued as a critical reserve contributing to landscape coherence and amenity, with slopes providing vital linkages and coherence across the landscape. So one of the keys of the ridgelines visual protection is coherence of the landscape. But
It's also, and this shows you what I was talking about before, the need for a broad area to provide visual protection to a ridgeline. The left-hand slide is off the top of Marshall Ridge, and if the wide protection is removed, you lose all vertical visual protection, as you can see from the right-hand diagram. National policy
before you go on, Mr. Blackett, can you just tell me, I'm assuming that the diagram on the right is a schematic, it's not to scale, it's to illustrate the concept.
Just a free drawing, yes, but it illustrates the fact that the ridge line is rounded and fairly flat on top.
Understand, yeah, just to be clear.
In my opinion, the council development team claimed that they needed to go ahead with Upper Stebbings Valley and Glenside West because the national policy statement required it. But in my opinion, they haven't read the policy statement, because if they had, policy 3 indicates those areas which are to be developed and intensified, and does not include hillsides, ridgelines or steep areas at all. In fact, the fact they're missing probably means that the policy standard is intended not for these areas to be developed. In fact, we would go further and contend that it's not just important to reduce urban sprawl, but urban sprawl can be upwards as well as outwards. And it's not just visual. The visual protection also acts as a surrogate for minimising environmental impacts in this area, because it's quite impactful to build housing up in this area. Earthworks, roads, infrastructure, the cost of building and so on is much greater up in ridgelines than in lower flat areas. This is what's been proposed by both council and the developer. The left-hand diagram shows where the development is proposed. The yellow area, medium density housing, I think 122 housing units in that area, and the 3 roads are just indicative, I think. The purple areas show the bush gullies and valuable natural forest, and the brown line that goes around the bottom and right at the very top of the picture shows the ridge lines and hilltops overlay. So the council area is designed to be totally inside the overlay, and it has a designation of discretionary, which is not as severe as non-compliant, but in our opinion that doesn't include subdivisions, housing subdivisions. And the right-hand side is the developer's proposal. They're proposing to make longer roads reaching further down, and you can see that they've also included orange hatched areas which they want to be developed as well, and they include an area where the 2 roads cross just to the left of the flat water tank, which will mean filling in that gully, which is the top end of the gully that leads into that bushed area. And at the right-hand side, they're proposing a cul-de-sac that goes right up into the top area close to the ridge line, and an extension into a bush gully on the right-hand side. So the area there that they propose for development is much greater. We don't have a figure for how many houses they propose, but it'll be much more than 122, I think. This is another photo showing the site, and if I had a pointer, I'd be able to indicate where those roads are going to go in that picture.
Well, why don't you step up and
okay,
and give us an idea? So,
Reedy Block is over here, and that's already been bulldozed for development. That'll happen soon, and then the road, Farmland Terrace, comes up to here, and then will extend up here into the Mather Block, and there's room for housing there, which is outside the area being proposed. and then it'll come along here, the road will come along here and up, and somewhere it'll go up into that area, and the lower road will drop down below the lower water tank and roughly follow this ridge line down the farm track right down to here.
Thank you for that.
These are comments by Boff Miskell, who produced a very comprehensive report on this area in 2018. I won't read it all out, but I'll just note that Marshall Ridges are valued as a critical reserve contributing to landscape coherence and amenity, with slopes providing vital linkages and coherence across the landscape. And these are just two maps drawn from their report. And it shows particularly the perennial streams in blue and the ephemeral streams in yellow. And any development here will obliterate the ephemeral streams and will impact on the perennial streams, especially lower down, where the earthworks will be extensive at the top end of it. And the right-hand side shows areas of high ecological value, but Boffinus could point out that some other areas lower down can be allowed to regenerate as well. We don't have an earthworks plan for the Reedy block, sorry, for the West Glenside, but the Reedy block, which is just about where I live, the earthworks have been massive, and they involve taking a hillside, the end of the ridgeline, and bulldozing large areas flat to create Farnworth Terrace and flat areas on both sides of Farnworth Terrace, and that generates almost vertical escarpments both above and below where the housing is being built at the moment. And the right-hand diagram shows again the extent of it. Again, I'll just get up to show you. This here was the original part of the land, and where that hole is was left in place because it couldn't be replaced. That's where the land was. All of that has been bulldozed out, and that huge volume of soil has been moved across and moved over to fill gullies to the left of the screen to create the flat areas. Now, one of the problems of our area is flooding. Stebbings Valley is known for flooding, but it's protected by two detention dams. And the left-hand photos are of Stebbings detention dam after a heavy rainfall incident. And it's doing what it's supposed to do. It forms a flood behind the dam, but the water continues to flow under the dam during that time at quite a rapid flow rate. So the water will go up towards the top of the dam and then drain back down over a period of several hours. But there's very rarely any water behind the dam at all in normal circumstances. And the right-hand figure is the same sort of thing for Set and Nossiter. It provides a detention dam to offer some protection against flooding in Porrera Stream downstream. And this is very important for us because a lot of our residents live along Porrera Stream, especially in Willow Bank, where they've been seriously affected by flooding. And so these dams do offer them some level of protection. But the problem is with both the Reedy block and inside west of it develops is it won't benefit from any detention dams. The runoff will just go straight down into Porrera streams. And with the increase or the reduction, or the increase, sorry, of hard surfaces with the company's development, then that's going to increase the problem that exists now. Now, there is a standard that's been adopted by council, which I'm sure you know about, to maintain hydrological neutrality. Council have said that for this area to achieve that, they would need to have 30% permeable surfaces. and the developer has asked for that to be reduced to 20%. The actual standard, as far as I can tell, is a standard written for Wellington Water by Cardno. It's a very technical standard, and it says that the 30% permeable surfaces is the right standard for flat areas, and it wouldn't be sufficient to protect from steep areas such as what Glenside West will be, where the angle or the slope will average much more than 10%. So if the development does go ahead, there will have to be large numbers of other mitigation measures to have any hope of meeting that hydrological neutrality standard. In fact, we don't really believe it's going to be possible. But if it's done, there will have to be extensive use of all the other mitigation measures available: water ponds, swales, rain gardens, planting areas in forests and so on, as well as just maintaining the permeable standard. Part of the solution would be water tanks, but these will have to be very large and devoted just to collecting rainwater from the roof. They can't be used for other uses such as storing water for gardens or swimming pools. They have to be left empty all the time and connected to the stormwater so that the water will run out all the time, but the flow will be restricted during heavy rain events and spread the load just the same way that the detention dams work. So in conclusion, we ask Council to reinstate District Plan Change 33, ridgelines and hilltops visual overlay to Marshall Ridge. Recognise that the standard for urban development does not apply to areas such as Marshall Ridge. Protect steep terrain and apply hydrological neutrality where stormwater runoff could exacerbate flooding. Discourage major earthworks in sensitive environments, and reclassify this development area as large lot residential only. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blackett. I have two questions only. The first is that we talked to the representatives of Greater Wellington Regional Council yesterday, and they were concerned about the same issues that you're concerned about.
Yeah.
But they told us that best practice stormwater management would be required for these development areas for all of the reasons you've given us. But we asked them, well, if best practice stormwater management is implemented, does the regional council consider that the end result will be an acceptable environmental outcome? And their answer was yes. That obviously it's a conditional answer. If there's best practice stormwater management, the end result will be acceptable. What's your response?
Well, I'm not an expert, of course, but I note that the regional council very rarely say that something shouldn't happen. They always come back and suggest mitigation measures so that what developers want to happen does happen. And a good example of that is the earthworks that I showed you on that slide, where the regional council, instead of opposing it, they said as long as the sediment was manageable, then they wouldn't oppose the earthworks being of that level. So they employed a consulting company, I think it was called South Pacific Rainbow, who advised them how to do those earthworks to minimise sediment, for example. But I would put it to you that it's not just water runoff that we're concerned about. It's all of the effects I've mentioned. And so in the process of mitigating one measure, you're just going to make another measure worse.
And the last point I want to raise with you is your point about the national policy statement for urban development. And wondered if there's a chicken and egg issue. What we're dealing with here is an issue of what is the appropriate zone. Now, if the answer to that is that it's a medium residential zone, which I understand you don't support, then the NPSUD will apply. And if the answer is that it's a large lot development, which you say I think is the only acceptable development, then it wouldn't. And so it's sort of like a chicken and egg. But what the NPSUD also directs the council to do is to ensure that projected 30-year development, 30-year demand, or demand over a 30-year period looking forward, is provided for in the plan. And so that's a separate issue sitting alongside, well, if it's MRZ, how to what extent must you develop it? So I wondered if your point, it doesn't apply, really addresses the core question in front of us.
Well, again, I'm not an expert, but I believe that the intensification that's been allowed in the city centre and suburban areas actually does offer a lot of opportunity over time. That opportunity doesn't occur immediately because people just stay in their houses, but it's surprising in a 30-year period how many people will sell their houses or agree to sell them to a developer for development when they don't have any intention of doing that right now. So I think we'll find that in a 30-year period there will be a lot more opportunities for intensive housing and high-rise blocks come available step by step.
Okay, I'll ask my colleagues if they have any questions. Commissioner McMahon.
Good morning, Mr. Blackett. Just two questions. In terms of the first bullet point that's on the screen in front of us now, which is to reinstate the plan change 33 ridge lines and hilltops overlay to the Marshall Ridge. We'd heard from yourself and also the Mr. Tiley, I think, that the broad approach that was in the 2005 plan change 33 has been scaled back in terms of the proposed district plan. My question to you is, has the Glenside Progressive Association actually lodged a submission in relation to the ridge lines provisions in the proposed district plan?
Oh yes, we did so with the draft district plan and the proposed.
And the proposed, okay.
So we'll see you again in a future hearing on that point.
I'm not suggesting coming again. I didn't know there's an opportunity.
There will be another hearing on those. I can't tell you when it will be or which one it will be, but I will ask Jazz to email you.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
So a differently constituted hearing panel, right, will be considering separately those ridge lines, but like they're integrated. I'm not saying you're in the wrong place,
right?
But in terms of the submission you said you've described to the commissioner, we will be hearing those issues separately, and then at the very end we'll be putting the end result of our findings on that point alongside our findings on this point, and trying to making sure they're consistent. Yeah. So, okay. but that's just for your information. So I'll ask Jazz to email you details about when that hearing is going to be.
Okay.
Just in relation to that answer, the nature of that submission, did the submission stipulate a spatial area to which the overlay should apply to on Marshall Ridge?
If we go back to look at the proposal, the dark grey area there, council have designated it, they've given it a new name called Ridgetop.
Yes.
And they've said that's non-compliant. Okay. But my point there is, although that's welcome, it won't give much visual protection at all because of that diagram.
Okay. So I'm taking it from your answer that your submission seeks to extend that dark grey area.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Now my second question relates to whether this should be an urban development area or whether it should be large lot residential. When I'm considering these sort of matters, I ask myself, is there any fundamental impediment to the land zoning changing? And you've identified the potential of stormwater runoff as an issue. Would you classify that as a fundamental impediment that can't be dealt with through planning provisions, either both at the district level or the regional level, such that more intensive development couldn't be envisaged?
Well, I'm a layperson, so I can't give that professional opinion, but my opinion would be that if the development is allowed to go ahead, then the consequences will be worse than people imagine at the time they'll give approval.
I understand.
That's been my experience.
Yeah, I understand that, but if there are sufficient checks and balances in the planning framework, both at the city council level and at the regional council level, dealing with their respective jurisdictions, controlling sediment runoff from earthworks, would that give you confidence that the process would at least consider those matters?
Sediment runoff is just one issue. And as I said, there is a process for minimising sediment runoff once the project is complete. That's why I mentioned South Pacific Rainbow and their process. But that doesn't apply during the actual earthworks, which can go on for years. And when you've got rain events during the actual earthworks, the sediment can be massive. Sediment runoff can be massive. So yes, that's a conditional answer. But of course, flooding is separate from sediment, and visual is separate from both.
Yes, I understand that. Are you suggesting that the amount of earthworks and sediment runoff that would be associated with large lot residential zoning would be more manageable than that associated with a more intensive residential zoning?
Oh yes, much more, because the houses will just choose the right places to build, and they'll build off existing driveways.
Yes,
I would think anyway.
Yes.
So there'll be almost no road building, and the locations we chosen where we just need to build a flat platform for the house, and that's about all.
So it's the quantum of earthworks associated with the zoned outcomes that are of concern to you.
And also, of course, people who buy large lot residential will normally plant trees and look after the bush and forest that's already there.
Okay, thank you for those answers.
Just to follow on from Commissioner McMahon, had you thought that, I know you've centred on large lot sized properties there. Did you think that there were certain areas that were suitable for higher, medium sort of density residential, or you think that the whole area should be large lot?
Yes, I think so. When I've been up to look at it, and you can see from the slide there that it's an area characterised by knobs and gullies. There's no sort of flat area there that you might say, oh, we could put a few, a reasonable number of houses. I mean, obviously you could find an area where you could put half a dozen houses, but we're talking about enough to warrant building special road access to. And so that is either large lot using existing driveways, or it's something that's going to be fairly substantial. No developer would develop an area like that and just agree to have 30 houses put in. It wouldn't pay.
When you say existing driveways, what do you mean?
Well, there's some houses existing there at the moment, like there's the farmhouse on Bob Warren's property, which is now, of course, owned by the developer. There's the Mathis property. The Mathis got a house there, and so driveways could come off there. And the Hannahs have one too. They might be interested in using part of the land for large lot. So there are opportunities with using existing driveways.
You may have heard earlier that the panel have planned to do a site visit up around this area, so we can have a better visual. So it's good to hear what you're saying now, and when we go and see the site in a month or so's time, we've got a date to do that. So your words are very helpful today to help us visualise, and then
Right.
seeing it on ground will be a lot more beneficial for us.
Yes, I think a site visit would be very useful because the land is a lot steeper than it looks just from photos or plans.
Yeah, no, I
It's very
understand that.
different.
Yeah. Thank you.
Commissioner Schofield, there.
I think you've answered most of my questions already, but could you turn to the slide that showed the dark grey and the grey map plan? Yeah, that one. So so all the proposal, the recommendation from the reporting officers, most of that grey become open space zone, so won't be developed. So that's not the concern to you. The concern to you, I'm just trying to clarify, is the impact of those few roads and the housing associated with those on the views of the hillsides.
Yes, I suppose so, but the developer has marked that area in grey with yellow hatch, which means they advocate large lot residential in that area, and we don't. We say large lot residential should be confined to the yellow or orange areas, not go that high.
Okay. And I think you've answered my question around the impacts of just rezoning the whole block as large lot residential, that you think that the earthworks in particular would be a lot less than the urban development.
Oh yes, I mean the earthworks would probably be only about 1% of what would happen if it was developed intensively according to the right-hand diagram.
Including the access ways and things.
Yes, well, on the left there is going to be housing outside that area that's been marked at the top of the Mather property as well.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blake. I appreciate
Thank
your time. For the CentrePort team, we're running a bit behind time, I'm afraid, but, so we'd really like a cuppa. Don't mind waiting a little longer. And so we will reform at 11:05. And we'll hear from you then. And Jazz, if you could tell Mr. Grace, he probably, I think he's listening now, but that we won't need him before 11:20 at the earliest. But if he hooks in at 11:20, that should be sweet. Should be certainly sufficient time. And lastly, to record that Mr. Schofield is exiting stage right because he's declared a conflict in relation to both CentrePort and corrections. We'll adjourn until 11:05. So we'll resume the hearing here, CentrePort, reduced group of 3. Ms. Searle?
Kia ora. I have William Woods here with me, who's the Strategic Planning Manager for CentrePort. I'm not making a statement, but happy to answer questions. So I've just got a really brief statement that I can run through.
Yes, if you we've read your pre-circulated statement, so I don't want you to read it, but if there's anything in particular you want to highlight, then please do.
Yeah, so I guess the statement today is just responding to the council rebuttal evidence.
And do you have a hard copy, like not necessarily to give us this second,
I can send one through to Jazz, yeah.
but if you can give it to Jazz afterwards,
Yep.
that would be appreciated.
So my evidence addressed 3 specific issues. The remainder of the points in CentrePort's submission were generally accepted by council in the Section 42A report, or just not addressed any further. So those 3 issues addressed in my evidence, and then again in council's rebuttal evidence, were seeking clarity on how the provisions in the port zone apply to passenger port facilities, and that's particularly in a harbour port precinct. And my evidence suggested some amendments to more accurately reflect the way I feel those should be drafted. Sort of related to that is making sure that the provisions don't preempt that future redevelopment of the site, and making sure that the zone and the precincts continue to provide for those current operational port and passenger port facilities. And then the last point was seeking the removal of that notification requirement from Rural Port Preco 1 R7. CentrePort was generally seeking an enabling framework for operational port activities and passenger port facilities to make sure that existing service providers can continue to operate effectively, particularly within the inner harbour port precinct, and that's talking about Blue Ridge. And my primary statement sought clarity on how those provisions apply to those passenger port facilities, and suggested some amendments to better provide for that. When I was reviewing Ms. Van Haren-Giles's rebuttal evidence, I realised that it appears that passenger port facilities is being used to mean passenger port operators. I don't think that's how the definition is drafted, and I think you might have discussed this a little bit on Tuesday during council evidence. So I generally agree with the way Ms. Van Haren-Giles has assessed the issue, but I think some minor amendments to the rules can better reflect the intent of those provisions, which I believe is that the buildings and land use for existing operators, i.e. Blue Ridge, is permitted, but that buildings and land use for new operators is not permitted. And I think possibly the easiest way to do this would be to, instead of having a rule for existing passenger port facilities, would be to change it to passenger port facilities, the defined term, for existing operators as a permitted activity.
I think the possible amendment that we talked about was to invert what's currently the wording in Preco 1 R7. That was the proposition I put to the reporting officer. Currently it says construction of buildings and structures and alterations and additions to buildings and structures not related to existing passenger port facilities or operational port activities, but to amend the activity covered by Preco 1 R4, have that entire wording, but without the word not. So that it would be construction of buildings and structures and alterations and additions to buildings and structures related to existing passenger port facilities or operational port activities in the precinct, which would be permitted without any standards. So what's your attitude to that?
Yeah, I think that would work as well. I just wonder if it's that existing passenger port facilities. When you look at the definition of passenger port facilities, it's the use of buildings and land. And if you're saying existing use of buildings and land, I guess the use of land might cover other development associated with the existing operator.
It's so new construction of new buildings, alterations and additions to existing buildings related to existing port facilities. So what else could they want to do?
Yeah.
So, as I say, that was the concept I discussed with the reporting officer.
Okay. I think that probably does. I think that probably would cover it off. Yeah.
Okay. And is there anything else you want to address?
Yes, I think this was also discussed during council evidence, but just tying back to CentrePort submissions about ensuring there's an enabling framework for port activities. In my evidence, I saw some amendments to Port Preco 1 Policy 4 so that the amenity and design requirements don't apply to operational port activities and passenger port facilities. I agree with Ms Van Haren Giles that it's not necessary to refer to operational port activities because they're permitted already. And if there's a tweak to the passenger port facilities rule that we've just discussed, then agree that that change doesn't need to be made to that policy 4 because those activities would be permitted.
I was thinking more generally about a concept of a complete carve out for operational port activities. You're saying in effect that amenity requirements don't make sense in that context. I could understand an argument that there should be a lesser focus for operational port facilities, but I had to wonder about a complete carte blanche that you could, because of the, like one of the crosses that CentrePort has to bear is that you're on a very visible site. And so the question would be, is there a case for a reduced focus on amenity for operational port activities, but not open slather? And then the tricky bit would be how you captured that concept. But as I say, I'm a concept person, I leave that to the planners.
I don't know that we have scope to really address that. I guess going through that point though, the only time where you might be able to consider that is if there was an operational port activity that where there was a building that exceeded the height limit. So I guess that requirement could kick in then, in which case I agree that that probably is appropriate to consider it at that time. But yeah, I guess that's a very limited sort of opportunity to consider that. It's 27 metres is the height, the maximum height.
Conscious I kept on interrupting you. Is there anything you want to add before I ask my colleagues if they have any questions?
No, that was all. Just otherwise to I noted that Ms Van Giles recommended removal of that notification requirement from Rule R7,
Yeah.
Which, yeah, I support it.
Which obviously you're happy about.
Yes.
Mr. McMahon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Ms Searle and Mr Woods. That was my question, actually. I didn't actually appreciate that reporting officer had recommended the removal of that notification requirement, so I don't have any questions for you.
Mr. Birch?
Just one really. You've clarified the outstanding issues for us, so that's helpful. We asked the council officer the other day about the 10% of the precinct building coverage cap for a kiosk or the like. The question was put to the council of whether that should be in metres squared rather than a 10%. But yeah, I just wondered if you had a view on that.
I think probably from a plan usability perspective, I think it might be useful to put a metre squared area in there. It's a little bit easier to understand and to measure rather than having to figure out what is 10%, you know, and working your way backwards.
Yeah.
I think it would be useful, yeah.
Yep. So I'm just checking back my notes with the council the other day to see if there's anything else
I
outstanding.
suppose I should ask the follow-up. What is the what would the metre squared? What is 10%?
What is 10%? Yeah.
We can come back to you on that.
Like I wonder if rather than inviting you to give us one figure, I could ask you to liaise with Ms Van Giles and agree a number.
Yep, absolutely.
Just have one more clarification. Just bear with me for a minute to make sure I get the right. Just in regards to Port Prec 02P2, I understand that perhaps you didn't actually submit on this, and there's no scope to change, but this is about whether it, you know, is to manage the effects of development within the multi-uni user ferry precinct. Maybe you did submit and you wanted and, you know, avoid, remedy, mitigate. But we're talking about, you know, manage to what extent.
I'm not sure what CentrePort's submission was. That does sound familiar, that they sought avoid, remedy, mitigate.
Yeah, rings bell to me.
Yeah.
Don't.
Personally, my opinion is avoid, remedy, mitigate is a little bit clearer. I agree that manage doesn't tell you much, doesn't give you much direction.
Mm-hmm.
I think the question I posed to Ms Van Giles was that void, remedy, or mitigate doesn't give you any direction as to how much mitigation either.
Yeah, I guess that's where the points that sit under that kind of come in, and it's
Yes.
There's always going to be some judgment there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's all I had.
That's all from us. As one request, I think, from you, for you.
Yep, we can come back to you on that.
that.
Are you happy for me to just include that in my statement, written statement that I provide from my notes
If you're
today?
able, if you're able to reach a landing, just include it on the bottom.
Great. we'll do that. Thank you.
So save the paper war. That'd be appreciated. Nice seeing it. It's a sparkling performance, I have to say.
Sometimes this is more, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to both of you. We're up to Mr. Grace, who I think is online. Talk to us about corrections. Hi, Mr. Grace.
Morena.
Thank you. Can you just give me a tick? Hannah, just one thing. We'll message you when we're about to leave for the quarry.
Sounds good.
Now, Mr. Grace, we've read your evidence. Mr. Jeffries has made some alternative suggestions to your relief and his rebuttal. Did you have the benefit of listening to my discussion with him?
No, to be honest, I did not. Yeah.
Well, like cutting to the chase, the concern I expressed with your suggested amendment to the supported residential care rule was whether it was in scope. Mr. Jeffries presented a line of reasoning to suggest that to support his view that it was, and I was querying that, and this, so that was one point. And the second point was he had suggested that the provision for residential activities be linked to Arahata's operation, and I was querying whether that was too narrow and it needed to be broadened to relate to corrections activities rather than just Arahata, rather than get into the issue about whether, for instance, supported residential care is part of the prison, associated with the prison, or something that happens alongside the prison but on the site. But mainly I'm interested in your your response on those two issues, because I understand exactly what you're seeking and why you're seeking it, but that's what's troubling me.
Okay, well, thank you for that background. In relation to the scope issue, and clearly I'll stay within my lane given my my role as the planner here, and we don't have legal representation. However, I think it is quite clear in that the submission of which I was, an author, did seek that where the council were to agree that that definition of supported residential care be removed from the plan, we would also seek that the associated references to it throughout the plan are likewise removed. So, and Mr. Jeffries has included that submission point in his supplementary statement or rebuttal statement. So I don't think I can say anything further on that, other than for me that gives that certainly gives the scope to allow us to pursue that through the relief in this in my evidence.
Well, before you go, I understand that arm of the logic. So yes, you've asked for all references to supported residential care be removed. Now, fine, and that put a line through it. It's the next step, putting in place provision for a broader activity, namely residential activity, that I'm querying whether there is scope to do. It's yes, because your because your client's relief, that you drafted, but like I understand that, that's not a problem that you drafted. It gives you an understanding of what exactly what it said. But the issue is the taking away is fine. It's putting something new in its place. That's what I'm focusing on. And if any assistance you can give to me on the second question.
No, I see what you're driving at here, and I guess look, this was an issue which was obviously traversed through hearing stream 1, and I guess the position that collectively between Poutama and the council where we landed on that was that there needn't be a separate definition in the plan for supported residential care, because it is inherently a residential activity. So in terms of a reference to or replacing supported residential care with a definition to residential, there's actually no broader scope, in my view, brought about to that. So there's no change in the nature of the activity, because what was previously defined as a supported residential care activity was, for all intent and purposes, a residential activity. So hence, in my view, that it's not really broadening the scope of what's otherwise now allowed for through the new wording of the policies and the associated rule R4.
The issue that I perceive with that is that you're absolutely right. In stream 1, Mr. McCutcheon recommended and the hearing panel accepted. Well, remains to be seen whether the council accept our recommendation, but just put that issue aside.
Yeah.
That was that there's no effects-based reason to distinguish between residential activities and supported residential care, and more to the point, no effects-based reason to have standards that apply to supported residential care that don't apply to other residential activities.
Yeah.
Now, in the residential zones, that's fine, because you drop supported residential care out, you delete the rule, which is what the hearing panel recommended. And there is already a permitted activity rule for residential activities. But in this zone, there isn't an existing permitted activity rule for residential activities.
Mm-hmm.
So you're filling that gap, and you're enlarging what was previously there. That, understand your point, the hearing panel agreed that there's no basis to distinguish between the two, but putting a rule into the plan to provide for residential activities to me, needs a submission seeking that. Like I struggle with the concept that it's consequential. And to give you an example, as the rule was notified, you had provision for supported residential. It was a combination, but we understand what you're talking about.
Yes.
If you substitute, and that is a particular subset of residential activities. There's no reason to distinguish it, but it is a subset. The way you suggested it to be drafted, this could be Arahata staff accommodation, which is quite a different. Like it's a different activity, probably no different in effect, but it's clearly it's a broadening. So that's what's troubling me, and anything you can give me to make me less troubled would be appreciated.
Well, perhaps could we give you a bit of context as to what other correction zones around the country have applied? I mean, would that assist the panel?
Well, I'm not sure it would, because like this is a narrow technical point.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
That speaking for myself, I don't have a problem in principle with the merits of what you said, of what you're suggesting. Can I just make that clear? That follows from our recommendation in stream 1. There's no basis to distinguish between. My concern is about the narrow technical issue about whether having asked solely to take something out, that gives scope to put a larger scale of activity or a broader scale of activity back in its place. And having moved, like if we were still in the IPI, it'd be easy, because we're saying for the avoidance of doubt, we'll make an out of scope recommendation. Thank you very much. But we're not. We're now back in the ordinary scope rules, trying to say, well, where's the submission that authorises this? So
Yeah, look, I completely appreciate that, and I guess again, all I can do is reiterate the fact that the type of activity and whether that would be, and to be honest, staff accommodation isn't really something that's being considered as part of our submission on this plan, and indeed others around the country where we've had the correction zone, special purpose zone imposed. It's certainly all about the potential for future housing of most likely ex-prisoners who have been released from a custodial sentence, or perhaps not, but likewise under some level of supervision of the department. That the nature and scale of that activity, as in what was previously, I guess, defined as supported residential care, is very much a residential activity. In terms of the scope, I understand where you're coming from. However, it was quite inherent, at least for me, that if there was going to be, removal of that particular definition, that there would need to be something that goes in its place, and the logical definition is the residential activity definition, as per discussions on that in here in stream 1.
Now, can I ask you the really difficult question, the one at the sharp end? Like, I don't know what my colleagues think, and whether they think I'm off on some frolic of my own, focusing on these technical issues, and their view may yet prevail. But on the assumption that the panel gets to the position that there is no scope to provide generally for residential accommodation, either as you sought, or that Mr. Jeffries recommends it be qualified, would corrections prefer what there is currently in the plan, which is reference to supported residential activity, which is not a defined term anymore, or would it prefer no rule at all?
Yeah, I think I can answer that one, and I'm also looking at Mr. Gifford here, but we would certainly prefer the latter, if that were to be, as in just leave the reference to, the undefined reference to supported residential care in the plan.
I think that's the former. So if we get down to the short straws and we find that there is no adequate answer to the technical question, you'd prefer to leave it be than to have no provision for any residential activity of any kind.
Correct. Sorry, I meant to say latter there. Should have said latter. Apologies.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions, colleagues?
Just if I might just make one quick point there, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
And that's just in relation to in terms of the scope and the original submission points that were made. The submission certainly stated that we, or the department, are of the view that the residential activity definition applies and needn't be, you know, there needn't be a sub category of supported residential care, because there is the residential activity definition, and we supported the use of or the imposition of the residential activity definition throughout the plan. Perhaps that doesn't necessarily close that scope issue off. However, there was that submission point made, so I'd just like to bring that to your attention as well.
That's useful. I need to go back and reread the submission, because as I say, I don't have a problem with the merits of what you're suggesting. I just need to be comfortable with how we're getting there.
Appreciate that.
No, my colleagues are not prepared to dip their toe in this particular pond. So I think lastly, going back to where the discussion I was having with Mr. Jeffries, he suggested right, his wording. Where are we? Number 2.
It's in relation to correction zone policy 2.
Yes, I think it is.
Yeah, the limited residential activities. Yeah.
Yes, limited residential activities associated with the Arahata prison. And the discussion I had with him was Arahata prison too narrow, and whether it should be associated with corrections activities or activities undertaken by the Department of Corrections, wording along those lines. What's your view on that?
Look, I mean, we would prefer the relief as per my evidence, just because that then, in relation to the limit, the reference to limited, perhaps taken on its own, it's that doesn't necessarily give any kind of certainty. I mean, for instance, what does limited actually mean? It's not until we then read the rule that suggests that, well, that's the 5 residential units. However, in relation to whether it's associated with Arahata prison or the correction zone or corrections activities more generally, I don't really have a view on that. It's probably neither here nor there. In terms of any residential, units that were to be established on the site, for all intent and purposes, they would be run under the ambit of corrections for the purpose of running the prison itself. I'm not sure if you.
So what I take from that is you're not concerned with the last part. It's the limited. The word limited that you would focus on, right? That you would express some concern about.
Yeah, correct. I mean, not a huge amount of concern there, but it's just as I say, taken on its own, looking at it on its own, that it's a bit uncertain to what that might actually mean. So if you're in a resource consent process, for instance, well, what does limited actually mean above and beyond the permitted 5 units or buildings for the zone? So that was probably our only thought there. My only thought. Happy to live with that one, but yeah, would obviously prefer the wording in the relief as per evidence.
Understand. I think that's it from us. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Grace, to Mr. Gifford in the background. Like all good clients, kicking you under the table at appropriate intervals.
From a distance, yes.
From a distance, it's all subliminal. I know. As I say, appreciate your time, and we'll call it a day.
Okay, no, thank you very much for hearing us today.
Thank you. And on that note, we will adjourn the hearing until 9 o'clock on Tuesday to hear the representatives of Wellington International Airport and BARS, Board of Airline.
That's right, yeah.
Yep. What the acronym stands for.
Yeah, they're
those people. Ms. Chappell's clients. So we'll hear them 9 o'clock on Tuesday, and we'll look forward to seeing Mr. Jeffries back and at that point.
Yeah.
Well, good.